Welcome to MasterMinds, Lessons in Leadership. I am joined by my co-host, Peter Linneman, where we discuss the intersection of leadership and strategy, which is at the vortex of what makes all great companies great. And we are pleased and honored to have with us today Conor Flynn. Conor is the CEO of Kimco Realty Corp. And as I remember, Conor, you joined the company, what was it, in 2003?
That's right. Correct.
And were named CEO in 2016. I'm not one to keep records, but I got to tell you, if I was keeping records, you'd probably be right at the top of the list, Conor. Not so many people go from where you started to where you have become, in a brief period of time. And so you've been CEO for about 5 years now.
That's right.
So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about Kimco, and we're also intrigued on whatever you can tell us about the Weingarten acquisition, which appears to be a stroke of brilliance.
Appreciate that. That was a beautiful intro. So Kimco Realty, for those of you who are not familiar, we're a member of the S&P 500. We were one of the founding fathers of the modern REIT era. So Milton Cooper and Marty Kimmel were the two founders of Kimco. Milton likes to make the joke, Kimmel is Kim and Cooper is Co. And the only other option they had was Cockham. So they didn't go with that name. So we are very fortunate to have really visionary leaders that founded Kimco. And the entrepreneurial spirit still burns bright today at the organization. And Kimco is an owner-operator of over 400 open-air grocery-anchored shopping centers and mixed-use assets. So we're the largest landlord for the likes of Target, Walmart, Costco, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Safeway Albertsons, Ahold Delhaize, Kroger, TJ Maxx, Home Depot. So the open-air shopping center sector, which has dramatically changed over the years. And the Weingarten transaction was a wonderful combination of really two legacy REITs. Weingarten is one of the oldest REITs as well, and they're an owner-operator of open-air grocery-anchored shopping centers across the Sun Belt markets. And so the combination is one we've been admiring them for a long time, and we believe the combination should really lead to a lot of long-term value creation for both shareholder bases.
So, Conor, I know you are very limited in what you can say, given the nature of where the acquisition is at. So I'm not probing that, but how do you see retail, brick retail going over the next 5 years, 7 years strategically? Where's your head at in that regard?
Sure. It's a good question, Peter, because I think a lot of people wrestle with the online version of retail and the brick and mortar version, and really what does the future hold. And one thing I think the pandemic has really shined a light on is the value of the last mile brick and mortar store. And the last mile is the sort of the term that we use to talk about the locations that are closest to the consumer. So think about pockets of density where shopping centers sit there, where the neighborhood has grown up and gone vertical around it. Those stores through the pandemic were deemed essential, and they were delivering the essential goods and services that helped a lot of people through the pandemic. And many of those were grocery anchored, but home improvement as well, and other uses. And what we found is that the value of the last mile location has changed. It's become a hybrid model. It's become one that's used for distribution as well as fulfillment. So most people these days potentially start their shopping either on their phone or on their computer. And what's happened is the last mile store is really starting to fulfill that order. And you also have that optionality to pick if you want to buy online and pick up in store. BOPIS is the term that's become very hot. And so that buy online, pick up in store trend is actually accelerating through the pandemic. So people have started to use the shopping center in more ways than one. And the retailers that have really sort of taken hold of the blueprint of the future is one that's using omni-channel. So it doesn't matter if you're an e-commerce or a physical brick and mortar retailer, you have to have all those points of connectivity to your customer and be able to fulfill an order no matter how they want it. And so that's why we've actually seen, leasing spreads, which is the rent we're able to generate from the space, actually be positive throughout the pandemic and going obviously through the recovery today.
So, Conor, let's switch the subject of leadership for a minute. Peter and I have been blessed. We've interviewed over 10 CEOs so far, probably more, Peter, so far.
Yeah, more.
And the whole issue of culture has come up time and time again among these great leaders relative to really being one of the key drivers of business success. So tell us a little bit about the culture at Kimco and how important that's been to your business success.
Yeah, culture is everything. I mean, when I give all the credit to Milton, he's obviously someone that is very focused on culture, and it's still, a really sounding, a marker for Kimco for the future is we continue to believe in the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. It's a very, very simple rule, but it's one that we live by. And I think from a culture perspective, Kimco is one that's been through a lot of cycles, been partners with a lot of people, and partners both on the joint venture equity side, partners with customers, partners with retailers, and we continue to want to be sure that we treat others how we want to be treated. And we do believe in meritocracy, that has to be part of your DNA. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful fertile ground for Kimco over the many, many years to generate many leaders in the organization, not only still at Kimco, but that have gone on to run other public companies. And, we were big believers in mentorship. We're big believers in putting together development plans for individuals. You've helped us on that actually on numerous occasions to be sure that we have, plans in place to really ensure that we invest in our people, because, there's no better investment in my opinion. And that's been the Kimco way for a long, long time. And so we continue to strive to be, leaders in not only the retail shopping center sector, but in the REIT world as well.
And kind of let me ask one more question before I turn it back to Peter. Milton's profiled in my most recent book, and just give the audience just a little bit of perspective on when Kimco was founded, just a little bit more about Milton, if you would.
Sure. So Kimco's over 50 years old. We started as a private company. Milton and Marty were running it out of New York, actually. Milton grew up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which, if you're familiar with Manhattan in the 40s and 50s, it wasn't the place to be like it is today. And so there was I think a DNA within him to make sure that we eschew waste. We obviously look and make sure what we can do in terms of being the most efficient operators as possible. And we really focus on the business and how do we become the best operators, the most efficient operators, so that we can really survive no matter what cycle comes our way. And Milton will tell you, he's never been through a pandemic. This is his first. But he's been through plenty of other natural disasters and cycles and crashes. And, I think a lot of the same building blocks of how you manage through crisis, nobody had a pandemic blueprint to how to get through it. But we felt very confident that our business was going to rebound. And it's a little bit incredible to think that our share price is back above pre-pandemic levels in such a short period of time, because retail was clearly disrupted significantly. But the team in place, the portfolio that we've curated, the opportunities that we see for value creation. Milton is a visionary in a lot of ways and just continues to look for new and intriguing ways to create value, and was really the architect of our Albertsons investment, which, if you remember, we bought the defunct Albertsons banner from SuperValue, which was really not really a grocery operator. It was more of a distribution company. And so we were able to turn around the Albertsons banner with Cerberus and other partners, and then continued on an acquisition spree with the Albertsons banner to bring on other banners, taking Safeway private and then relaunching it as a public company in the middle of the pandemic. And our $140 million of investment is now worth over $750 million. So a little different off the fairway of what you traditionally do in terms of grocery anchored shopping centers, but we've always had that entrepreneurial spirit, and Milton continues to be a wonderful, big believer in the future of our business and the future of our product type as well.
Building a culture around Milton Cooper and his values is a great place to start. To be like if you had to start an NBA team, starting with Kareem and LeBron James, that would be a good place to start.
I agree. It's always good to have a lot of picks.
Yeah.
Throw a little bit of Michael Jordan in there too, Peter.
It was Michael, and there's you got it. So what Conor, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. I visit one of your really good centers 5-7 years from now. How does it look different? I'm trying to get where you're long enough to let some of the leases have expired so you can work with. That's all I'm trying to get to the 5 or 7.
Yeah.
What will it look like versus today? Or will it pretty much be the same?
So it will depend on the asset and the location, right? It's all real estate is very local. So depending on what's going on around that asset will determine the highest and best use of that real estate. And so a lot of our real estate, I think, will look very different 5 to 7 years from now. And so one of the big strategic initiatives that we've put in place is to really unlock the highest and best use of the underlying real estate. So if you were sitting with a blank sheet of paper, what would you build there to unlock the highest and best use and to create the most value? And we've put together a world-class team focused on entitlements, which really gives you the right to build whatever that highest and best use is for the real estate. And over the past 5 years, we've secured 5,000 apartment unit entitlement rights. And our goal for the next 5 years is to get to 10,000 apartment unit entitlement rights. And so we believe that our assets are fundamentally underutilized. So if you look at what I call, really just the 80-20 rule for shopping centers, 80% of our asset is just parking lot that's not generating any revenue. 20% is single story buildings. And so if you're surrounded by density that's gone vertical, many times you're sitting on the most underutilized form of commercial real estate in that corridor. And so it could be hotel, it could be office. We've been very successful with residential because the way I like to think about it is if you look at New York City or any of the big major metro markets, how do they charge premiums? They charge premiums to markets because they're able to have like a suite of amenities that differentiates their product from the competitive apartment tower. What does a shopping center already have? It has all those amenities. It has the Whole Foods. It has the dry cleaner. It has the coffee shop. It has the gym. It has everything you could possibly imagine that you would want already baked in at the ground floor. And so we feel like in the right locations, the long-term value creation that we can really focus on is, again, looking at the highest and best use of that real estate and then setting up a way to unlock that for the future.
Conor, back to leadership again. I guess, Peter, you're probably the youngest CEO we've interviewed as of now. We interviewed Matt Kelly. You guys may be pretty close.
Yeah, they're about the same age, I would guess.
Right.
They're the same age as us, Bill.
Yeah, by about half, Peter. You just look more well-preserved than I do, which is really a blessing on your part. But anyway, as we said before, you've been CEO for 5 years, a long road ahead, a lot to learn. But if somebody was to ask you, what's the most profound leadership lesson you've learned in 5 years, what would you say?
Oh, gosh, never get too high, never get too low. I mean, looking back at the 5 years, we started off, being, at a torrid pace in terms of thinking we were going to take over the world. And then all of a sudden the retail apocalypse hit, which set all the retail stocks off a cliff. And then we slowly built ourselves back and we're ready to go on an offense again. And then the pandemic hit and the retail stocks fell off a cliff. And now we've built ourselves back up. And so I think, you trying to keep a steady hand, knowing that, again, if you focus on the core fundamentals of what's going to help your business grow long term and not get too caught up in the short term, surround yourself with people that believe in you, surround yourself that, people that are smarter than you, make sure you have a good diverse board that recognizes the challenges you're going into. There was a lot in there. There was not just one, but that's some of the few things that off the cuff I think of that's really helped me through some challenging times.
Bill, if I might piggyback, it's not quite, but piggyback on, and what is it like to work in the shadow of a true legend like Milt?
I think anytime you have a mentor that is like a Milton, there's obviously positives and negatives along the way. You want to try and become your own man. You want to try and make your own mark. But you also need to listen a lot and learn a lot through, all the wisdom and the knowledge that he's built up over time. So I don't think it's very different from any type of mentor relationship that you have. You just need to recognize that nobody is the same. Everybody, and I've had many mentors over my career, when I look back and see, some of the other public CEOs that I've, had as mentors that were at Kimco and left, everybody takes a little bit of a different approach. And, the thing that I learned is that there's no perfect way. You try and, I think, take little tidbits from each one, and try and create a menu of things that you can really add value with. And, Milton is just a wonderful mentor, and is someone that I think is incredible to learn from. And his mind is always working in 100 different directions. So I never try and sort of leapfrog him. I just always try and make sure that I'm a sounding board and think things through out loud with him.
So if I were to tell you I've got your parents, I hope they're still alive, if I have your parents on the phone, and I'm about to ask them, what does Conor do that makes them most proud, what do you think their answer would be?
It probably starts with family. I think that they're right off the boat from Ireland, so they both come from big families. I have 3 kids, so they're probably proud of like the family that I have, and the father that I try to be. I think that's probably number one.
Interesting, Bill, that the other very young CEO, Matt Kelly, also told a very moving story, actually, about Ireland and being off the boat and so forth. So it must be the Irish thing. I don't know. So
right. If you want to be a young CEO in the REIT industry, you got to be Irish.
Got to be Irish. What can you say?
That's going to help me with all my succession planning work.
Yeah, well, and the other, Bill, is you now know how to do any searches you're doing, right? If they want a young CEO, find an Irish guy.
We have to have a new code in the system. Is he Irish or is she Irish, right? Absolutely. So, Conor, getting back to the issue of mentorship for a minute, I don't know if you would say, and then not that we're asking you to declare whether, Milton was your most influential mentor, but looking at all the mentors you've had over the course of your young career, what's been the lesson that they've taught you, more importantly than anything else?
Look, Dave Henry is an incredible mentor. Milton's an incredible mentor. Jeff Olson, David Lukes, even some of my first bosses at, when I was a leasing guy, John Visconsi. I just have so many different wonderful influences in my life, including my father, which was an incredible one from, real estate's in my bones. So because of him. And so I think when you look back at, any single sort of lesson that they teach you, it still boils down to, the golden rule. You want to treat others how you want to be treated, especially in a industry that's so tight knit. Retail has obviously thousands of retailers and a lot of landlords, but it's actually a very small community. And I remember learning very early on that, what you do and what you say will reflect upon you as well as your company. And you want to be sure that you send the right message that will resonate for the long term. And, my father always taught me to be myself because that's the easiest thing to do and you can't mess it up. So that always seems to have been a calling card that I've lived by. I'm very transparent. I try and over communicate because I feel like breakdown in communication is usually where things go awry. And so if you have people that you've worked with a long time, sometimes that comes natural. But if you have a big organization, especially that's going through a very tough time like a pandemic, we thought we were good at communication before. We realized we needed to revamp and really ramp up our communication across the entire organization, which we did. And that really changed, I think, the business IQ of the entire organization, of how we were going about managing through a very challenging time, how everybody was pulling their weight. And even in a remote setting, it became very powerful to be part of that team.
Peter, it's interesting because Conor's comments are very reflective of what John Gray said when we interviewed John. Integrity is the hallmark of who he is, and it's all about how he treats everybody around him, whether it's his people, investors, people he does business with. It's a powerful message.
So, Conor, it picks up not quite off the golden rule, but cousin of the golden rule is generosity. And you see behind Bill is a sign that talks about integrity and generosity. Talk to us, if you would, a moment about how philanthropy, whether of time or money or resources, both personally and the firm, fit into your thinking.
Yeah, it's something that we believe, is a big part of what makes Kimco special. Because if you think about it, every asset we own is almost like the downtown of a community. So we are, in essence, responsible for, in a lot of ways, the congregation point of these communities, of what makes it special, of what makes their home values go up, of what makes, the area to congregate, safe and inviting. And so we have been really focused on our ESG efforts for decades now, which before it was even termed ESG. And what we have found is that we have to be good stewards of the community, that if we can showcase that we are in this for the right reasons, for the long term, that we can build those partnership relationships with municipalities, because they're the ones that, whether it's the planning board or the city manager or the development committee, those are ones that we need to work with to make sure that they recognize that our existing asset is not necessarily what we think is going to be the highest and best use for their community as well. And one of the things that we have found to be very, very influential is to showcase them tons of examples that we have done across the country of how we've transformed, these downtown hubs of the community to create a vibrant, inviting place to live, work, and play. And that's the key for us, is to sort of create that vibrant place that people want to be at. And that usually has a halo effect. It usually, when we start a project, we see everybody piling into the same trade area because they know what we're going to create is going to create that halo effect around it and creates that uplifting community spirit. And so we've been very focused on that from a corporation side of it, because it's part of our charity giving, it's part of our time, and we give our employees days off if they want to, go ahead and spend their time and their money at charities of their choice. Personally, I think time is probably one of the most critical items that you can dedicate. And so I've tried to do it with all of the organizations as well as institutions where I've earned my chops. So whether it's from my grade school, my high school, my college, my grad school, just going back and focusing and letting them know that I can help in different ways. And so I've tried to teach as little as I know to as many people as I know to try and help them. And I think it's something that I get a sense of satisfaction on as well. And again, it's funny being I would say a real estate developer. You sometimes are looked at as someone that's not really focused on the environment, where personally, a lot of the charity that I give is actually to, environmental protection.
So Conor, as a wrap-up question, we're going to let you be the mentor. And let's assume you've got a bunch of recent graduates you went to Columbia, as I remember, business school?
Yep.
Right. So let's assume you've got some newly minted grads sitting around the table, and you wanted to impart a kind of your own leadership lesson for them to remember as they start their careers. What would you share with them?
So the way I always try and say things is that, in my experience, I don't try and project what they should do, but take what has worked for me, and maybe there's bits of it that could work for them. So in my experience, what worked for me was getting my foot in the door in an organization that was going to be focused on making sure, if you are going to dedicate the time and effort, and I've dedicated most of my life to this organization, where if you're going to dedicate yourself to it, that they're going to give you an opportunity to succeed. And there's a tremendous amount of organizations out there that do that, but there's also a lot that don't. And, you've got to make sure you get your foot in the door. Don't worry about the title on your business card. That really is meaningless in the long term. I started out at Kimco leasing a second floor 1950s office space that was pseudo medical, not like it hadn't been touched in decades. And what worked for me was that I tried to figure out a plan that could lease those spaces up. And then all of a sudden I sort of became known as the fixer, where I wasn't afraid of any really challenging thing that nobody else wanted. And then you start to build up your career that way. You start to get given better opportunities. You start to move yourself around the organization and learn all how the different parts fit together, and find yourself a great mentor. Find somebody that you think is doing it the right way, and try and figure out what makes that secret sauce for them work. Everybody has a different recipe, but try and figure out what makes that recipe special for them. And it doesn't have to be your recipe, but just try and make sure that you take little bits along the way and learn, and that'll really help you develop, I think, into a successful leader in your own right.
By the way, is that shop space, is that little office space still leased, or
Are you looking for some, Peter?
I just want to know.
We turned it into like a dentist-themed office suite. So we did a model unit where I used the best-looking fake wood floor on the market. And painted it and created a model suite, which we were able to lease, and then kept going. So that was like sort of the 101 leasing that I did.
No, that lesson alone is worth the price of admission on this one. So
you probably painted the floor yourself, right, Conor?
Oh yeah. You won't recognize some of the stuff that I was given when I started. The phone and the fold out desk is no longer in use.
Yeah.
So, Conor, thank you. Bill, I'll let you take us home from here.
Yeah. Well, Conor, thank you. This has been great. And once again, the reason we love this series is we get to talk about leadership and character, and you exemplify all of that. So we very much appreciate your time, and the best of luck.
Absolutely. My pleasure.